Good morning and welcome to History Week 2021 at the Museum of Fire. This year we've had to go 100% digital, so thank you for joining us online for this, our annual Keynote presentation. My name is Marcus Baker. I'm the Chairman of the Museum of Fire. My background, I'm a retired firefighter from Fire and Rescue New South Wales, formerly known as the New South Wales Fire Brigade. This year, the theme of History Week 2021 is From the Ground Up. The museum's heritage team elected to take a look back at the earliest days of firefighting in Sydney to look at how we got to where we are today. This period of history is rarely represented and so is an interesting topic to be discussed. This is the second time we have hosted a keynote presentation, and I'm pleased that it has become a regular occurrence, although I do hope that next year we can return to having all the presenters in the one room. In many ways, hosting this digitally is a great benefit as every speaker is coming to you from a different part of New South Wales, the furthest located up in northern New South Wales. So it's through the benefits of modern technology that we can all come together. For ease, we have pre-recorded most of the presentation, but our team are monitoring this presentation. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, please place them in the comments section on Facebook, and our two presenters will be answering them after the broadcast ends. If you're watching this after the fact and have questions, please still ask it, and our team will endeavour to answer it as soon as they can. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker to present the annual keynote address. This is Belinda McMartin, the CEO of the Museum of Fire. Belinda has a Master's in Museum Studies and a Bachelor of Arts with honours in History Heritage. Belinda came to us in 2015 as the Senior Research and Heritage Officer, and last November we appointed her CEO after steering us through lockdown 2020. So, who was responsible for Sydney's first fire protection in the earliest days of the colony? Who were these people, and why did the military fire brigade only last a few years? These are questions Belinda will be answering and more as she looks at our history from the ground up. So, as they say on Insiders, over to you, Belinda.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And good morning, and thank you for joining us for History Week 2021 at the Museum of Fire. Things are a little bit different this year, but I am delighted that we can bring you our annual keynote presentation as part of our History Week offerings. This year, the History Week theme is From the Ground Up. When we think of firefighting in Sydney, where do we begin? We must inevitably go back to the beginning. But where is the beginning? 1884 is remembered as the origin of the New South Wales Fire Brigade, who are today known as Fire and Rescue New South Wales. And the 1840s is well known as the origins of the Insurance Brigade era in Sydney. But what came before? What was the real beginning of Sydney's fire protection? We know that there must have been someone caring for the city, but who were these people? Pre-1840, there is little known about Sydney's fire protection, which is why we thought it was important to bring you this history as part of our History Week 2021 offering, and our response to the topic, From the Ground Up. It was the military that was initially in charge of Sydney's fire protection. These men literally helped to protect Sydney from crumbling to the ground, and in essence, they were a big part of establishing the colony from the ground up. Fire is an inevitable part and parcel of colonial life in Sydney, Australia, and, of course, around the world. It wasn't, however, until the 1820s that attention was given by the early colonial authorities to the fire protection of Sydney, with the purchase of 2 fire appliances. In fact, it was 200 years ago this year, so back in 1821, that the order for Sydney's first fire appliances was made. These appliances were in the care of the military, who, should a fire occur, were to be the ones that were the first on the scene. Effectively, the military were in charge of the earliest fire protection of Sydney. Prior to the appliances being provided to the military, it was still the military that were generally the first port of call for any emergency within the colony. So the progression of them taking over the official fire protection was a natural one. Before I go any further though, let me set the scene. The year was 1821. We're talking 200 years ago. And this was when those first steps were made to ensure Sydney's fire protection. 2 appliances were purchased by the authorities, and by the end of 1821, they had arrived in the colony. The year, like most before it, provided great change to our young colony. Amongst other things, the Australian magazine made its debut, Australia's greatest export at this time was wool, and the female factory at Parramatta was created. Indeed, we cannot forget that at this time, Sydney was still a penal colony. The governor was Lachlan Macquarie, and we all know just how influential he was on the future of the establishment of the Sydney colony. His tenure would end on the 1st of December 1821, when he was replaced by Thomas Brisbane. This is when the story of the military brigade really begins. The new fire appliances were used for the first time on the 15th of January 1822, and this was when a minor fire occurred at the barracks. This was a small chimney fire, but more notably, this was the first time that the military got to use their new appliances. In many ways, therefore, we can consider this to be a great fire, as it was the first to be responded to with fire engines in Sydney. Despite being the best appliances in the colony, they were pulled by hand and they were considered inadequate for Sydney's needs. Luckily, there were few instances when the appliances had to be used by the military. We know that the water supply in Sydney's colony caused major problems, and though Sydney is girt by sea, accessing water in the centre of town, in this case for a fire, was not easy. In fact, in 1827, there is no mention of any of the appliances, or in fact the military, turning out to assist in a big fire. Rather, the police were noted as descending on the scene to keep off the hoarders and the looters. This may well be the reason why a decade later, a building was erected at the police station to house the fire appliances. This was considered to be a more central location in the city, and it was better located than the military barracks. It also coincided with a major progress in making more water accessible throughout the city. The first real incidents that we know of that involved the fire engines being used was on the 30th of November 1833, and this was to aid a ship fire. And even though the brigade were delayed in responding, their efforts were admirable. Though the appliances were moved to the police barracks, it was still the military that responded. The Captain Alexander was docked at King's Wharf, and whilst offloading her cargo, she suddenly exploded. The force of the explosion caused the entire ship to become engulfed in flames. News reports state that the fire engines arrived shortly on the scene, with the military guard and a number of police officers to preserve law and order, whilst the soldiers battled the ever-growing blaze. Despite the efforts of the soldiers, they were unable to save the brig, and within minutes, fragments of the burnt wreckage were floating all over the harbour, causing massive issues to the safety of shipping in the area. The fire spread to a nearby schooner, the Anne Jamieson, and some of her crew were injured in this initial explosion. On the wharf, 2 premises caught fire, and the staff of the customs house rushed to assist the soldiers. Thanks to their efforts, the fire was contained and no further damage on land was seen. 2 hours after the brig caught fire though, it filled with water and it sank. The explosion was attributed to gunpowder that was stored on the vessel. At least 7 lost their lives on the brig, and 1 man was injured on the other vessel after he had to have his leg amputated due to the force of the explosion. Of the 7 that lost their lives on the vessel, they were the chief mate, the carpenter, the cook, and 4 seamen. The next major fire to make the news reports in Sydney occurred a few years later, and this was in December of 1837. In this instance, at about 12:30 a.m. on Saturday the 2nd of December, fire was discovered in a street behind George and York Streets, in between King Street and Barracks Lane. The origin of the fire was Mr. Hoskin's surgery, and it soon spread to 2 nearby premises. There was great fear that the fire would spread to all of the buildings within the vicinity, so all residents were very quick to begin removing their possessions from the path of the fire. The military brigade were on the scene within 30 minutes. If it were London, it was pointed out that they would have been on the scene in 5 minutes. Their delayed response times were a constant criticism in the print media. However, also, given the location of the fire to the military barracks, one would have assumed they would have been on the scene quicker than 30 minutes. Despite this, they were noted as working well, and it was highlighted that they actually had a brand new fire engine. The soldiers managed to stop the spread of the fire, but they received criticism across all news reports. Some of the main grievances were, of course, their response times, but also that if the conditions were not favourable, for example, if there was strong wind or there was a lack of water supply, the soldiers would have been very ineffective. For this reason, the desire of the public to have an insurance brigade in Sydney, like those in London, was highly sought after. Basically, Sydney wanted trained firefighters. By the start of the 1840s, it's actually unclear who was responsible for the colony's fire protection. The number of insurance company brigades was growing exponentially, as were volunteer brigades. The insurance companies created brigades to protect their interests, but there were a number of businesses that the insurance brigades would not cover. These were things like theatres, printing presses, and breweries. Due to the high fire nature of these businesses, the insurance brigades wouldn't protect them. So the businesses, more often than not, established their own volunteer brigades to protect them. But when it came to a government-sponsored response to fire in Sydney, or a brigade, who was actually in control? On the 18th of March 1840, the colony faced its largest fire ever, and it was all hands to the pump. This included the insurance brigades, local citizens, and the military brigade. The behaviour of the military, however, was not commendable, and this only helped to seal the deal and the fate that the military were not the best option for the colony's fire protection. The fire began in a building adjacent to the Royal Hotel in George Street and was caused when a man fell asleep, presumably with a lit cigarette. At about 1 a.m, he awoke to find fire all around him, and despite the efforts of those to extinguish the flames, it spread incredibly quickly. The military response was immense. There were 150 soldiers that came to the scene, but most turned up in various states of dress, and it was reported that many looted from the burning buildings rather than battled the blaze. Both the military fire engines were at the scene, as were at least 3 from other insurance brigades. The fire continued to spread, and soon the police also came to the scene, as did 300 convicts who were brought down from the barracks to assist. Despite this, no effort could save the Royal Hotel and the theatre that was contained inside. As 1840 came to a close, the fate of the military brigade was basically sealed. In 1844, the question of who was in charge of managing Sydney's fire protection was put to bed, with the city establishing its own brigade, with Thomas Bown as the first full-time and qualified firefighter to be employed in Sydney. Thus, we enter the next, better known of Sydney's fire history, the insurance brigade era, and this is an entirely different topic for another day. Though we think of these initial appliances that came to the colony in 1821 as being in the possession of a military brigade, this isn't necessarily the case. It is more likely that the appliances were used for the protection of the city, but it wasn't that there was a brigade assigned to them. It was more whoever was assigned to be on shift at that particular time that took the appliances to a fire. So, in question, who protected the Sydney colony prior to the establishment of the military brigade in 1822? This is a good question, and we don't have a really clear answer, but it is likely that it was the military. This response was only formalised in the 1820s with the introduction of these new appliances. Everything has an origin story, and it is those people that make history possible. It is great that we can share this early story that hasn't really been covered that much in the past. As you can see, it's an era that we're still learning about. I would like to thank you for joining us this morning as we take a look at history from the ground up. I feel incredibly privileged that I can bring you this history in this manner, and hopefully next year we can do it in person. I would now like to introduce our next guest speaker. This is Ian Grimwood. Ian, you may remember, joined us last year, and Ian is a station officer up at Lismore. He is an expert on the relationship between military history and fire brigade history. Ian is going to talk about this development into the 20th century, and I look forward to hearing what Ian has to say today. Please remember that at the conclusion of today's proceedings, Ian and I will be back to answer your questions. So please pop your questions in the section on Facebook. And if you aren't on Facebook, or if you're watching this at a later date, please still ask your questions and we will try to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and I'm now going to hand it over to Ian.
Hi there, my name's Ian Grimwood and I'm a station officer with Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Firstly, I'd like to thank Belinda and the Museum of Fire for the opportunity to speak to you today, albeit through a pre-recorded presentation. The photos that I will show you are mostly courtesy of the Museum of Fire, and thanks for that. The aim of this presentation is to highlight the close association that the Australian military forces and the Fire Brigade in New South Wales have had since the 19th century and up to contemporary times, and to put some faces to the names of those that have gone before us. So the Fire Brigade in New South Wales has had a few names, starting with the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, which was established in 1884, and a portion of the senior leadership and many of the firemen over the next 15 to 20 years were ex-Royal Navy and Royal Marine personnel. Consequently, much of the ceremony, traditions and firefighting methods of the brigade through the decades can be traced back to the Royal Navy's early influence. This is due to the fact that fire at sea is a sailor's biggest fear, and so the Royal Navy had developed procedures that were efficient and effective, and they were able to be transposed into structural firefighting. In fact, as early as 1885, preference was given to ex-seamen, be they merchant or Royal Navy, due to the following. Regulation 5 stated, all other things being equal, preference will be given to seamen. Seamen were considered good firefighting material because they were agile, used to discipline and long stretches of standing watch, could do knots and splices that were needed for firefighting, and were accustomed to eating, sleeping and working on the same premises. As can be seen by the following information, we can appreciate the contribution of the Fire Brigade and the Australian Defence Force to external and internal operations by complementing each other. The adventurous aspects of both military and Fire Brigade life have an appeal which attracts similar personality types. So the earliest conflict I can associate with the Fire Brigade and military forces is the Sudan War of the early 1880s, where the colony of New South Wales sent a contingent of 758 men, being an infantry battalion and artillery battery, in 1885. And I've found a Private Richard Isaac Barrett of D Company, New South Wales Infantry. He was an ex-Royal Marine, and he returned to Australia on the 19th of June 1885 from the Sudan, and after spending some time in quarantine at North Head, he was appointed to the Metropolitan Fire Brigade on 6th of July 1885. We then moved to the Boer War of 1899 to 1902, and that saw veterans from this conflict return to Australia and begin to join the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in increasing numbers. And I've been able to identify 14 members at this time who served in South Africa. I've got a couple here. I've got this fellow right here. You can tell by his medals that he served in South Africa. And this fellow, Charles White, and he was a station officer at Cessnock. And again, he's got the Queen's South Africa Medal, the King's South Africa Medal, and that's a Fire Brigade Long Service Medal that he's got there. So the medals tell a lot. The Fire Brigade would have been a good option for men coming back from that Boer War, as it sort of times were tough back in those days, and it provided some security and stability. So at the same time as the Boer War, the Boxer Rebellion broke out in China, and we have this fellow, Frederick Sturch. He was born in England, spent some time in the Navy, but then came out and joined the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in early 1900. He resigned in mid-1900 and enlisted in the New South Wales Naval Contingent to China. And it's interesting that he's quoted as helping put out a couple of major fires in the British legation when Chinese rebels lobbed incendiary devices over the wall and started fires. So he used his little bit of experience there. And it's noted that 3 Sydney firemen were part of that part of that China contingent. So Sturch came back from China, and then when World War I broke out, he enlisted again, was part of the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force to Rebel, came back from that, enlisted in the AIF into the 9th Field Ambulance, and then transferred to Infantry Battalion. And at the age of 41, he fought at Messines up in Belgium, and he was shot in the legs and eventually discharged in December 17. Then during World War II, he became a senior warden for the Regent's Park area, and he was detailed to respond to potential bombing, and he would have been instructed by Fire Brigade air raid precaution instructors. So he maintained that notion of service to the community. So World War I was a big deal for the Fire Brigade, of course, and we had 324 members that we know of served in all theatres of the war, with 31 of these enlistees being killed. And this is obviously a World War I veteran with his medals on, and at this time I don't have a name for him. If anyone recognises this fellow, could they contact the Museum of Fire or myself at Lismore Fire Station, and I'd love to identify this fellow. Here we have another great photo, courtesy of the Museum of Fire, of some function in the rear yard at headquarters. And when you look closely at this picture, the majority of these fellas have medal ribbons on. So it's taken some time after World War I, with many veterans involved. So on to World War II. At the end of World War I, with collaboration between the union, the department, or the board, I should say, of fire commissioners and the Returned Soldiers and Sailors Association, it was agreed to re-employ or employ veterans. And between 1915 and 1938, 287 returned servicemen were re-employed or employed by the Fire Brigade. And it's good to know that the positions have been kept open in all subsequent conflicts for firemen or firefighters who have gone off to serve their country. So they brought back a great level of experience in leadership and dealing with high stress situations, of course. So they inputted an awful lot of value back into the Fire Brigade. So World War II, the Fire Brigade established air raid precaution instructors, and they instructed Fire Brigade staff, public and private institutions. And by 1942, 131 members had been trained as air raid precaution instructors. A reserve corps was established, and that numbered 1,453 in 1941. An auxiliary of a further 2,000 was established to supplement that reserve. And most importantly, a women's auxiliary Fire Brigade corps of 3,000 was established. I don't know if they hit the 3,000 mark, but that's the number they envisaged. And here's a great photo of, it was taken in 1944, of some members of that women's auxiliary training, doing a bit of wet drill. You can see the Harbour Bridge in the background. So with Japan's entry into the war, things got serious, of course, or closer to home at least, and the Fire Brigade was put on a war footing. They instructed Army, Navy, Air Force and the US Navy, and they had to prepare for invasion or bombing, basically. So fortunately, that didn't come to that. And I think what we learned from what happened with the Fire Brigade during World War II especially is that, as Winston Churchill said, the Fire Brigade had become the fourth arm of the services during the war. I know of 2 members who died during World War II. They were both accidentally killed. One was Albert Donohoe of the Hay Volunteer Fire Brigade. He was killed in a motor vehicle accident in Western Australia in 1944, serving with the RAAF. And Dudley Morris of the Hose Department was accidentally killed on Morotai in 1944, serving with the RAAF, when a grenade exploded in a rubbish pile that was being burnt off and killed him. So we had members from the same units joining together. We had a fellow by the name of William Hill. He joined the Fire Brigade pre-war, pre-World War II, and he rejoined it when he discharged from the army. And a fellow who was in his same regiment, Ron Jenkins, he joined. And you sort of often wonder if Hill maybe talked Jenkins into joining the Fire Brigade. Jenkins unfortunately died on duty at an electrical substation fire in Napoleon Street, Sydney, on 20th of July 1963. So an awful lot of veterans joined after World War II, and there's so many stories to tell. Don Abbott was in the 2nd 20th Battalion, captured at Singapore. He ended up on a hell ship up to Japan to work in the coal mines, and this is after he'd worked on the Burma-Thai Railway, and he was recovered in 1945 after Japan had surrendered. He came back and was an instructor at the college. A station officer, Albert Reid, was on the HMS Barham when it exploded, and if you Google HMS Barham, you'll see the footage. They have actually filmed this ship exploding, and how anyone survived it, I don't know, but one of them came and joined the Fire Brigade. I've heard the story of one fellow who went to join the police force, and he walked out onto Oxford Street and ran into an old army mate, and the army mate had just joined the Fire Brigade and talked him into walking down to Castlereagh Street and joining up with the Fire Brigade. And so word of mouth, what their comrades were doing, they all funneled in, a lot of them funneled into the Fire Brigade. And it makes me think that immediate post-war brigade must have been an amazing place to work, with the experience and camaraderie that the veterans shared. Men who'd seen so much would have provided cool heads in serious situations, and passed that knowledge onto, or that demeanour at least, onto the younger members of the brigade. So another great military connection we have with the Fire Brigade is, of course, our past late Commissioner Ian McDougall. He was an ex-RAN Admiral, Submariner and Cold War veteran, and he was appointed as the first New South Wales Fire Brigade Commissioner who had not been a firefighter. His skills in administrative organisation and human resources were used to progress the brigade into the 21st century, and he did a great job at that. So we come through the more recent conflicts of Vietnam. We had many members who were conscripted into national service and served within Australia and Vietnam, and they were able to return to their positions with the New South Wales Fire Brigade. And we had many members who joined the Fire Brigade after finishing their service with the Army or Air Force or Navy. So we come in even more recent conflicts: East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan, peacekeeping in Malaya, Somalia, Namibia, Rwanda, Cambodia, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. They've all had serving reservists, Fire Brigade reservists, go and serve in these areas, and we've had veterans of those operations come and join the Fire Brigade. So there's a real common thread there. In the recent domestic operations, if we can go back so far as Canberra in 2003, had the recent bushfire assist, New South Wales flood assist, border protection in Op Resolute, and the COVID-19 assist, again has seen serving Fire Brigade members who are reservists go and serve their nation and their states again in those operations. And interestingly, the Conspicuous Bravery Medal, 28 of them have been awarded, but 4 have been to our military veterans. So we have here 2 were awarded to members from the Armidale Volunteer Brigade. We've got Robinson and Colmer here. Robertson, he was awarded it posthumously because he died at Armidale when the action for the establishment of the medal occurred, and Colmer, both World War I veterans. That's Robinson again there. Better picture of him in his army uniform. In World War II veteran George Dowling, another member ex-veteran member who had won the Conspicuous Bravery Medal, and of course Dennis Rayner, our Vietnam veteran, who was awarded it for his actions at a fire on the Central Coast. So a rough estimate is since 2000, 359 members have been employed. These are veteran members, have been employed in administration in permanent and retained brigades. So 359 veteran members have been employed, which is a great thing, and it'd be good as if we can keep those numbers going. And 44 of these veterans have been women, so that's a great thing. We'd like to see bigger numbers there. These veterans inspire confidence within each other and within the team. Our firefighters value add the ADF, and the ADF value adds fire and rescue. And this simpatico between military and fire and rescue is most evident on Anzac Day, when a large contingent of current serving and ex-serving military and fire and rescue members march with their medals on, which illustrate the story in part of their service to the nation and state. I hope this has been informative, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Ian. Now I'm here to announce the 2021 Museum of Fire History Awards recipient. As the Heritage Partner to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the museum undertakes all historical research for brigade and station centenary events. We have a very small team here at the Museum of Fire, so we rely upon the dedicated efforts of individuals and organisations to assist us in the research process. To acknowledge these efforts in preserving our firefighting heritage, we created the Museum of Fire History Awards, an annual initiative that was officially launched last year. I'm very pleased to announce that the Blaney Shire Local and Family History Group will receive this year's award. Members of the organisation went above and beyond to assist in compiling research for the centenary of Blaney Fire Brigade early this year. A special mention goes to the members of Gwenda Stambridge and Rhonda Jones, who I spoke with regularly in the weeks leading up to the event. I would also like to informally recognise the contributions of Blaney as a whole. The current captain, Anthony Kearney, and former captain, Bill Purser, assisted me greatly. So it certainly was a Blaney-wide effort.
Good morning, I'm Superintendent Peter Stathis, and in addition to being the Commander of the Metropolitan East 1 Command at Fire and Rescue New South Wales, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Museum of Fire Board of Directors. It is my honour and pleasure today to announce the Museum's Life Member Inductee for 2021. In 2020, as part of the inaugural History Week keynote presentation, we launched our new visitation membership for the museum. It is most fitting that our number one life member is the late CEO of the museum, Senior Firefighter Mark White, AFSM OAM. Mark's contribution was immense, and his induction has set the bar high for future inductees. On behalf of the Chair, Mr Marcus Baker, AFSM, the Board, and our CEO, Ms Melinda McMartin, I'm very pleased to announce the 2021 Life Member inductee is Mr Brian Blunt. Without Brian, we wouldn't have the museum as we know it today. In fact, it was Brian and the late Station Officer, Mr Bob Weir, who purchased the Dennis Big 4 fire engine from the Board of Fire Commissioners of New South Wales. This is still on display and remains a key attraction of the museum. This laid the foundation for the creation of the Historical Fire Engine Association of Australia in 1969. Brian was one of the original 11 members, taking up the prominent position of Registrar. Words cannot do justice to Brian's commitment and contribution to the museum. He was prominent in negotiations with the Board of Fire Commissioners, which led to the operation of the Fire Services Museum at Alexandria. Then it's moved to Walsh Bay and subsequently to its present site in Penrith. He has championed the decisions of the future of the collection, captured countless photographs and imparted priceless knowledge. Brian has remained active at the museum, working closely with the board and the CEO. However, earlier this year he made the hard decision to retire as a fully active member. Thank you, Brian, for your efforts, which have not gone unnoticed. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for taking part in our 2021 Keynote presentation. Stay tuned, as shortly our two speakers will be back to answer questions, and we look forward to seeing you all in 2022.